With all due respect, General, is this some kind of joke? Dr. Evelyn Reed's voice, sharp as cut glass, echoed in the cavernous, sterile white hangar. She stood, arms crossed, a picture of indignant authority in her crisp lab coat. Her glare was fixed not on the three-star general beside her, but on the man being escorted toward them between two armed Air Force guards. He was old, maybe 75, with a quiet face and eyes that seemed to be taking in everything at once. He wore a standard-issue bright orange jumpsuit, the color a jarring wound against the laboratory's stark monochrome. General Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. His expression remained a mask of hardened patience. "Dr. Reed, this is Arthur Vance. He's here to help." "Help?" Reed let out a short, incredulous laugh. Her team of young, brilliant engineers, all clad in matching gray polos, shuffled behind her, some smirking. "General, we have a team of 200 of the world's top physicists and software engineers. We have quantum diagnostic arrays running around the clock. We are 6 months and $4 billion into solving this problem. You'll forgive me if I don't think a convict in a jumpsuit is going to be the miracle we've been waiting for." Her gesture took in the source of their collective failure, Project Nightingale. It sat in the center of the hangar, a behemoth of matte black composites and impossible angles, a stealth combat drone so advanced it was rumored to be 2 decades ahead of anything else on the planet. It was also at the moment the world's most expensive paperweight. It was dead, silent, and no one knew why. Arthur Vance said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the silent machine. His escort stopped him a respectful 20 feet away, a silent demarcation line between the prisoner and the priceless military asset. He ignored Reed and her team completely, his focus absolute. He walked a slow, deliberate circle around the drone, his worn boots scuffing softly on the polished concrete floor. His eyes weren't scanning for a specific flaw. They seemed to be absorbing the whole entity, listening to a silence only he could hear. Reed's patience, already thin, snapped. "What precisely do you expect him to do, General? Ask it nicely to turn on. We've dissected every millimeter of its code, run every simulation, cross-referenced every component against its schematic. The machine is flawless, and yet it does nothing. It's a ghost, a paradox. Let him work, Doctor," Thorne said, his voice low and firm, a quiet order that carried more weight than Reed's shouting. Arthur stopped his slow pilgrimage and turned to one of his guards. "Could I get a stepladder, please?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse but clear. "And a standard Phillips head screwdriver. A number 2 if you have it." A few of Reed's engineers openly snickered. One of them, a cocky programmer named Bryce, muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Sure, let me just grab my hammer and some leeches. Maybe we can bleed the bad spirits out of the server." Reed's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. "You see, General, this is a circus. My team is dealing with quantum entanglement failures, and you brought us a man who wants a screwdriver." She turned on Arthur, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, I don't know who you are or what arrangement you have with the General, but this is a multi-billion-dollar top-secret weapons program. We don't use hand tools here. We use atomic force microscopes. Now, if you're done with your little tour." Arthur's eyes finally met hers. They were pale blue, and for a moment the weariness in them was replaced by a flash of something ancient and unyielding, like a glacier. He didn't rise to her bait. He simply held her gaze until she, uncomfortable, looked away first. He then turned his attention back to the silent drone. "The problem isn't in the code," Arthur said, his voice still quiet, yet it carried across the hangar. "It's mechanical, or rather, electromechanical." Reed scoffed. "Impossible. The drive system is solid state. There are no moving parts to fail. We designed it that way." "Everything moves, Doctor," Arthur replied softly, his eyes tracing a line along the drone's underbelly. "If it has energy, it has a frequency. If it has a frequency, it vibrates. You're looking for a broken gear in a clock made of light." He continued his walk, his hand hovering over the drone's surface as if feeling for a fever. He was a physician making his rounds on a patient no one else understood. Reed's team watched with a kind of morbid curiosity, like spectators at a public shaming. They saw an old man in a prison jumpsuit, a relic of an analog age, fumbling in the dark while they, the masters of the digital universe, had already proven the darkness was empty. They whispered and pointed, their collective arrogance a palpable force in the room. "Clearance," Reed suddenly snapped at the guards. "Does this man even have clearance to be in this facility, let alone breathe on Project Nightingale?" General Thorne stepped forward. "I'm his clearance, Doctor. That's all you need to know." The tension thickened. It was a standoff now, not between man and machine, but between two philosophies. Reed represented the new world, data-driven, arrogant, certain of its own brilliance, and blind to anything it couldn't quantify. Arthur represented something older: intuition, experience, a tactile wisdom that couldn't be programmed. Reed, seeing the general would not back down, decided on a different attack. Her eyes fell to a small, faded patch sewn onto the breast pocket of Arthur's jumpsuit. It was crudely stitched, depicting a cartoon gremlin holding a monkey wrench and sitting atop a sputtering engine. It was the only personal touch on his sterile uniform. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked with a sneer. "Your prison arts and crafts project? A merit badge for good behavior?" For the first time, Arthur's hand went to the patch, his fingers tracing the worn embroidery. The bright, sterile light of the hanger dissolved for a heartbeat, replaced by the dim yellow glow of a single bulb swinging in a dusty, humid tent. The air was thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and fear. Outside, the angry scream of a jet engine spooled up. A younger Arthur, his face smudged with grease and his uniform dark with sweat, was stitching that same patch onto his flight suit. Another airman, a kid named Jimmy, clapped him on the back. "The Gremlin crew," Jimmy said with a grin. "If Art Vance can't fix it, it ain't meant to fly. Get that bird back in the air, Art. They're waiting for you." The memory vanished as quickly as it came, the roar of the phantom jet replaced by the condescending silence of the hangar. Arthur's fingers fell away from the patch. He had found what he was looking for. He pointed to a small, seemingly insignificant maintenance panel near the drone's wing root, no larger than a paperback book. "There," he said. "The problem is in there." Reed rolled her eyes so hard it was a performance. "We've had that panel open a dozen times. It's a diagnostic port. The connections are clean. The fiber optics are pristine. We've run terabytes of data through it." "You ran data through it," Arthur corrected gently. "You didn't listen to it. There's a resonance cascade in the primary motivator coil. The housing is vibrating at a harmonic frequency that's disrupting the guidance system at the quantum level. It's creating a feedback loop. The machine is trying to protect itself by shutting down." This was the final straw for Evelyn Reed. She laughed. It wasn't a smirk this time, but a full, unrestrained, mocking laugh. "Resonance cascade? That's pseudoscience. That's a term from 50-year-old engineering textbooks. The housing is a metamaterial composite. It's designed to be inert, to absorb vibration, not create it. We've scanned it with every sensor imaginable. It's as stable as granite." She turned away from Arthur, dismissing him entirely, and faced General Thorne. Her face was flushed with anger and professional outrage. "General, this has gone on long enough. This is an embarrassment, and more importantly, a critical waste of time. I am the lead on this project, and I am putting a stop to this circus right now. I am formally logging this unauthorized interference. This man is a risk to national security." She thought the general would finally relent. She thought he had played his last desperate card and failed. But Thorne's expression was unreadable. He simply watched her, his silence more unnerving than any argument. Convinced of her victory, Reed turned to her team. "Someone get me the project director on the line, now." But it was General Thorne who reached for his phone. He turned his back to the drama, taking a few steps toward the hangar wall for privacy. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tense air with absolute urgency. "It's Thorne," he said into the phone. "Get me the Secretary of Defense. No, I don't care what he's doing. This is a Nightingale priority alert. Tell him I'm here with Arthur Vance." The name hung in the air. To Reed and her team it meant nothing, but the audience in the hangar could feel the shift. A promise of thunder was gathering in the quiet of the general's phone call. Justice was no longer a vague hope. It was on its way. A frantic aide burst through the heavy oak doors of the Secretary of Defense's office in the Pentagon, a sheaf of papers scattering from his hands. "Sir, General Thorne is on line 1, secure channel. He says it's a Nightingale priority." Secretary of Defense Alan Carter looked up from his desk, his face a mask of irritation. "Thorne, what is it now? Did another one of Reed's eggheads fry a server?" "No, sir," the aide said, his voice trembling slightly. "He's at the Nevada facility. He says he's with Arthur Vance." The name changed everything. The annoyance on Carter's face vanished, replaced by a look of stunned, wide-eyed disbelief. He dropped his pen and snatched the receiver from its cradle. His knuckles were white. "Marcus, it's Alan. Report." His voice was stripped of all political polish, raw and urgent. There was a pause as he listened. "Are you sure? It's really him. And what do you mean he's looking at the bird? My God, Marcus, do you know what this means?" The hushed, frantic conversation that followed was a revelation. Arthur Vance wasn't just a former mechanic. He was a ghost, a legend whispered about in the highest echelons of military research and development. The name on the theoretical papers that formed the very foundation of Project Nightingale, the ones Dr. Reed's team had been studying, was A. Vance. The Vance cascade, the principle she had dismissed as pseudoscience, was the revolutionary theory that made the drone's frictionless propulsion possible. He was the architect, the original mind who had conceived of this impossible machine decades ago, only to vanish from public life under a cloud of secrecy and tragedy, taking the fall for a catastrophic accident caused by a superior's reckless decision. He was the mapmaker they had all forgotten. Back in the hangar, Dr. Reed was oblivious. She saw General Thorne on the phone and assumed he was reporting his failure, preparing to retreat. This was her moment to re-establish control. She stalked over to the two Air Force guards standing beside Arthur. Her voice was imperious. This man is a civilian, a prisoner, with no clearance, actively interfering with a top-secret national asset. This experiment is over. Take him back into custody. Now. The guards hesitated, their eyes flicking toward General Thorne's back. They were caught between a direct order from the project lead and the immovable presence of a 3-star general. Reed's face flushed a deeper shade of red. Did you hear me? That is an order from the ranking civilian authority on this project. Are you going to let this convict compromise this entire facility? Remove him. She took a step toward Arthur, pointing a trembling finger at his chest. Your little field trip is over, old man. Before the guards could make their fateful choice, a low, deep rumble vibrated through the concrete floor. It wasn't the sound of machinery inside the hangar, but something immense from outside. The massive multi-story hangar bay doors, sealed for months, began to groan open, flooding the sterile space with the harsh, bright light of the Nevada desert. A single, sleek, black helicopter, unmarked save for a small official seal, descended with quiet power, landing on the tarmac just outside. The downdraft was a whisper, not a roar. The side door slid open, and a man in a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out, flanked by 2 stone-faced aides. He moved with an unhurried, absolute authority that made everyone in the hangar, including Dr. Reed, freeze in place. It was Secretary of Defense Alan Carter. He strode into the hangar, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the polished floor. He walked directly past the stunned doctor, Reed and her entire team of shell-shocked engineers as if they were invisible, his gaze fixed on one person. He came to a stop a few feet in front of the old man in the orange jumpsuit. Then, to the absolute jaw-dropping astonishment of every single person in the room, the Secretary of Defense, one of the most powerful men in the country, snapped to rigid attention. He raised his hand in a sharp, formal military salute. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice ringing with a profound, unmistakable respect. It is an honor, sir. Arthur Vance gave a slow, slight nod of acknowledgement, the first sign of anything other than placid observation he'd shown all day. Secretary Carter dropped his salute and turned, his eyes sweeping over the bewildered faces of Reed's team. His expression was no longer respectful, it was glacial. Dr. Reed, he began, his voice dangerously soft. For 6 months, your team of supposed geniuses has been trying to debug a system by using diagnostic software that was written based on the foundational principles discovered by this man, right here. 40 years ago, you have been trying to use a map to understand the mind of the mapmaker. He gestured with an open hand toward the silent black drone. Project Nightingale does not exist without the Vance cascade theory, which you so arrogantly dismissed as pseudoscience. The revolutionary stealth coating that makes this aircraft invisible to every known form of detection is a practical application of Mr. Vance's doctoral thesis on metamaterials, a paper he wrote while you were in kindergarten. The frictionless solid-state drive you can't figure out, he built the first working prototype in his garage using parts from a broken washing machine and a microwave oven. You are not looking at a convict, Doctor. You are looking at a living national treasure. You are standing in the presence of the man who single-handedly guaranteed this nation's air superiority for the next century. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 200 brilliant minds simultaneously recalibrating their entire understanding of the universe. Dr. Reed's face had gone from red with anger to a ghostly, bloodless white. Her engineers stared, first at the secretary, then at each other, and finally at Arthur, their expressions a sickening mix of awe and dawning horror at their own monumental arrogance. Secretary Carter's icy gaze settled on Reed. Your certainty, Doctor, your intellectual pride and your refusal to look beyond the data on your screen has cost this project 6 months of time we do not have and billions of taxpayer dollars. You had the answer to your problem standing right here in front of you, and you tried to have him arrested. You will be reassigned effective immediately pending a full and thorough career review. He dismissed her with a final withering look. It was then that Arthur Vance finally spoke again, his voice calm and completely devoid of malice or triumph. He looked at the shattered Dr. Reed, and there was a flicker of something like sympathy in his pale eyes. The machine doesn't have the answers, Doctor, he said gently. It only has data. The answers are in the spaces between the data, in the patterns, in the silence. You have to learn to listen. You were all so busy reading the output you never bothered to listen to what the bird was trying to tell you. He turned away from her and looked at the small panel he had indicated earlier. He glanced at General Thorne. "May I?" The general nodded. "Please, Art." Arthur took the simple Phillips head screwdriver from the guard who now offered it to him with the reverence of a religious offering. He stepped up the ladder, his movements slow but steady. As he worked, the world seemed to narrow to the point of that screwdriver. For a brief second, the scene flickered. He wasn't in a high-tech hangar. He was a boy of 12, standing in the dusty, sunlit confines of his family's barn. The scent of hay and motor oil filled the air. He was hunched over his father's old, broken-down tractor, his small hands carefully adjusting a carburetor screw with that same intense, quiet focus. His father's voice, warm and proud, echoed in his memory. "It ain't about the fancy tools, son. Anyone can buy those. It's about knowing how the thing breathes. You gotta feel it." Back in the hangar, Arthur's hand was perfectly steady. He loosened the 2 screws on the panel, removed it, and reached inside. He didn't use a light or a scope. His fingers found a small, almost invisible copper coil. With the tip of the screwdriver, he nudged a tiny set screw, no bigger than a grain of rice, tightening it by a fraction of a degree. A low, resonant hum suddenly filled the hangar. It was a sound no one had heard before, a deep, powerful thrum of life. Across the room, a bank of monitors that had been dark for half a year flashed to life, a cascade of green lights indicating a stable, fully operational system. The Nightingale was awake. The fallout was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, a full presidential pardon was issued for Arthur Vance, his name and record cleared with the highest commendations. The official story of his imprisonment, a noble sacrifice to protect his superiors and the integrity of national security, was declassified within the Pentagon. The Vance Protocol became mandatory in all advanced research divisions of the armed forces, a new training regimen emphasizing intuitive diagnostics, hands-on engineering, and most importantly, cross-generational knowledge sharing. Young prodigies were now required to apprentice with veteran technicians and engineers, the so-called graybeards. Dr. Evelyn Reed was not fired. Her punishment was, in its own way, more profound. She was reassigned to the Defense Department archives, a cavernous, dusty facility filled with miles of paper records. Her sole task was to personally catalog, digitize, and study the entirety of Arthur Vance's life's work, 50 years of handwritten journals, scribbled on napkins, and labyrinthine schematics. It was a humbling, solitary education in the nature of true genius. Months later, in a sun-drenched workshop on a university campus, Arthur Vance, now dressed in a comfortable tweed jacket, stood before a group of bright-eyed engineering students. He was a guest lecturer, a living legend brought in to teach the next generation. He wasn't talking about quantum physics but about the elegant simplicity of a 4-stroke engine he was patiently disassembling. A hesitant figure appeared in the open doorway. It was Evelyn Reed. She was out of her lab coat, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater. She clutched one of his old leather-bound journals to her chest like a prayer book. The students fell silent, recognizing her from the news reports. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I think I'm starting to understand, about listening to the silence." Arthur looked up, and a genuine warm smile creased the corners of his eyes. There was no triumph in it, only grace. He gestured to an empty stool in the circle. "Good," he said kindly. "The first lesson is always the hardest. Come join us. Now let me show you all something truly amazing about the relationship between a crankshaft and a camshaft." Arthur Vance's story reminds us that true genius cannot be confined by walls or dismissed by pride. If you were inspired by this story of vindication, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more incredible stories of unassuming heroes.